what I wanted to do with these Summit Session Spotlight episodes was, because up here where I live in Lake Placid, right in the heart of the high peaks, mountains and outdoors, it's just what you do here. But so obviously I know so many people, and most people who listen to this show, they drive from miles and hours and states away to come up here to recreate into the outdoors. And I had been recently hearing all about different stories of different people getting super creative in the outdoors wherever they live. And that's what I wanted to showcase. I wanted to highlight on Summit Session Spotlight episode. So in that, Brian did this really cool thing where he hiked all the 1,000-foot peaks in New Jersey, where he's from. And yeah, you might say 1,000-foot elevation peak, that's a hill. And, some might call it a hill, some might call it a mountain. But he did over 50 of them, all of them. And I thought that was so cool. It was unique. It was just thinking outside the box and creating your own adventure. And it took him all over the state to all these new places he'd never been, and different views. And, he saw the New York City skyline on one of them. And it's like, to me, that's cool. So if any of you listening have done similar things, or of people who got really creative in the outdoors right where they live and they created their own adventure, let me know, because I would love to talk with them and, possibly make a whole episode about it, because I just think that's really cool. I don't think you need to always come up to the Adirondacks or to New Hampshire or wherever you may be driving. It's when you start to look around and seek out adventure, it is there pretty much anywhere you live, even out in the cornfields of Ohio, where we'll hear about the other Summit Session Spotlight with Paul later. But moving forward, number 87, Summit Sessions number 25, a winter thru hike of the Northville-Placid Trail with Tim and Henry Horvath, father and son duo, winter thru hike. I was cold just listening to them tell this episode about being out there for 10 days in the dead of winter. Because when I did the Northville-Placid Trail, which I sectioned, the first 3-day section that we did was in the winter. It was all snow and winter, and yeah, it was tough. Oh man, it was tough. And the thought of being out there for the whole trail like that and never like going inside, yeah, it's definitely a tough story. But those guys, I mean, they're very experienced, especially Tim. Tim is the father, Henry's the son. Tim has climbed everything on the planet. He's an absolute maniac. Very experienced guy. So this was just kind of like small potatoes, I guess you could say, for him, even though they wouldn't say it was. But in the scheme of what they've done, it probably seemed that way. But yeah, that's a really cool story. I highly recommend it, especially if you're going to hike the Northville-Placid Trail, and even more if you've already hiked the Northville-Placid Trail, because hearing a whole story, and the perspective of doing it in the wintertime will change everything about what you would have experienced, since 99% of people do it in the summer, just the straight up summer. But speaking of what I said earlier about creating your own adventure at home, so another Summit Session Spotlight, paddling Ohio's Maumee River with Paul Fuzinski. So Paul from the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, he told me about this time where they paddled the Maumee River, which he lives in like the Toledo area, and that river runs across part of Ohio. Forgive me for not remembering exact geography of it, but it was a river that's just like, it's just a river there. It could be paddled. Nobody does it because they just don't, but it could be paddled. So Paul and some friends started looking at maps, and they started mapping out this route. And they decided, let's do the whole fort to port. It was Fort, I can't remember the town. It starts in Fort something. There's a lot of different ones, but Fort something to a port. And they just did it. They just figured out where they could camp. They got permission to camp along the river, and they were paddling 30 to 40 mile days for a few days straight, and just paddled the whole river. Why not? Anywhere anyone lives, there's probably rivers here. There's probably rivers there. There's little trails here that you could hike this, or you could walk from here to here and connect it with a couple roads, and then connect this, outdoors area to this one via roads. And it's like you can create your own adventure anywhere you are, and that is what I'm trying to shine the spotlight on with the Summit Session spotlights. So if you have stories like that, lay them on me because I would love to talk. Moving forward, the Summit Session number 26, Small Town Monsters in the Adirondacks with filmmaker Seth Breedlove. So this was neat because Seth was the director of this film. So Seth runs I don't want to call it a production company because I don't really think that's exactly what it is, but it pretty much is, called Small Town Monsters. It's just this little world that he's created, and it's amazing. But they just, I guess they're a documentary film company. Let's just call it that. That's what it is. But they document, small town monsters and small town, legends and that sort of thing, and they have a really good following. And it's funny because when he was on the episode, I got text messages or Instagram messages from different people who are definitely, friends of mine in life who definitely are not not in my podcast world. People like compartmentalize people, like, you're in this world, you're in the music world in my brain, you're in the outdoors world in my brain, you're in my work world. But people from different worlds were messaging me saying, "Oh, I saw you had Seth Breedlove on your podcast. I love his stuff." So yeah, he's all over the place. But yeah, he was so stoked to come on the podcast because he loves the Adirondacks and he listens to the podcast. So that was really neat to have a conversation with him. But basically, he came up here and one of his Bigfoot documentary films, or it's part of a series that he has on Bigfoot, and he's different parts of the series shot in different parts of the country. But there was this shot, part of it was this series, I should say, or this part of the series was all about here in the Adirondacks and the Northeast, but 90% of that movie takes place here and was shot here. So obviously anyone who knows this podcast and knows me, I am super into the subject of Bigfoot, and especially Bigfoot here in the ADK. I always joke that eventually I'm going to turn this podcast into I'm going to get even more niche with my podcast and not just do an Adirondacks podcast and not just do a Bigfoot podcast, but do a only Bigfoot in the Adirondacks podcast, because I just want to get even more niche than I already am with an outdoors Adirondacks specific podcast. But anyways, yes, I've also, Paul from the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, who is also from Ohio, where Seth Breedlove is from, said that was my best episode to date as far as the Summit Sessions go, because he said that the conversation was just very fluent and nice. So I appreciate that compliment, Paul. And also on that episode, Jonathan Zaharik did the interview with me as well. So he was there. So it's just like fun talking Bigfoot and talking ADK with him. It's like that episode's fun because it's like half Bigfoot in the ADK and half just the ADK. Yeah, it's a fun episode, and I highly recommend going to check out his movie. Moving forward, The Race to the Lodge, probably the best episode of the year. Well, I should say the second best episode of the year. This was where Jonathan Zaharik and I raced from the Upper Works Trailhead to the Adirondack Lodge. And this was something Jonathan and I had talked about for a while. It was actually Jonathan's brainchild. He was the one that said, we should do an episode where basically he just told me he wanted to race, and he was like, that would be a really good podcast. I was like, yes, that would be a good podcast. So, I gave him a recorder, and then I had my recorder, and yeah, that's a fun episode. And in my opinion, it's the most unique episode on the entire series here in the 4646 podcast. So if you haven't heard episode 90, The Race to the Lodge, check it out. I will not play spoilers and tell you who won the race, but if you haven't heard it, but it's a fun episode. Basically, I'm driving the 60-something miles from the Upper Works Trailhead to the Adirondack Lodge, and Jonathan is running trails, the 10 miles between the two trailheads, as not even as the crow flies, just that's the mileage on the trails. So the question was, who will get there first? Me in a car, in my van, him on foot. Fun episode. I highly recommend checking it out, and it's definitely one of my probably top 3 favorite episodes here on the show. Moving forward, the Moose Mackenzie Traverse. If you're ever in Lake Placid, you see moose and you see Mackenzie everywhere. You may not know it, but you see those mountains everywhere. In particular, if you go up to like Main Street, Lake Placid, and you go, around Mirror Lake, where you're like kind of looking at Main Street and you're like at the beach and you see it. If you just look up, you can see the ridge for Moose Mountain and Mackenzie Mountain, and that's what that traverse is, up and over. So I stare at it. I see it 1,000 times a week. And if you're coming out of the Adirondack Lodge Road as you're driving like back towards Route 73, those big mountains that are right in front of you, like kind of across behind the ski jumps, that's Moose and Mackenzie too. So anyways, I've always been eyeballing that, and I was like, oh, it's a nice sunny day now. It's like summertime's coming. It was a good like warm up, I should say, for the season. And so that's a trail episode. And you'll notice here on the podcast that what my show originally was, which was just me highlighting my hiking adventures on the trails, it is evolved. And I think that's a good thing. People may be here for just the trail episodes for intel, and that's cool. And I still love doing the trail episodes. But I also got to the point where it was like, sometimes I just want to go hike and not, have the recorder and not be like as involved with noting like all the details and this and that. Sometimes I just want to go and shut my brain off and just walk. So I don't always do the trail episodes, but I'll pretty much continue doing them whenever I'm doing, I guess newer mountains I don't already have an episode on, or mountains that I think should have a trail episode on, or if something really neat happens on the episode on the trail. But so I feel the show has evolved this year here on the 46 of 46 podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed, the evolution that it has, from just solely trail episodes, because even those trail episodes have evolved with adding sound bites from the trail and all that stuff. But I hope with the summit sessions, the other stories, and what I'm hoping to continue doing this year with more story-based stories, I think it's a nice combo. Moving forward, if you're not moving forward, you're dying. So I'd like to continue to be growing and the show growing, which is why I continue to evolve. And I always have ideas for whole new types of episodes, and I hope that's cool. Hope you guys dig that, because it definitely keeps it interesting from my perspective. Anyways, moving forward. We're in August now. Episode 92, the Summit Sessions number 27, The Brazilian with Snowshoes with Liz Bacelar. So, Liz has an absolutely incredible story. One of my favorite Summit Sessions is this episode, and just her story in general. And Liz reached out to me. I remember, this was during 2020, August 2020. It was my first job back post lockdowns and all that jazz. I was in Philadelphia doing a Netflix movie called Hustle. We were in quarantine for like 10 days because Happy Madison Production made us quarantine. So I remember being in the hotel, literally just quarantining and just wanting to die because I was just not allowed to leave, not allowed to go anywhere. It was really boring. But anyways, during that time, Liz reached out to me. She found my podcast because she had started hiking during 2020, and as many people did, and it just completely changed her life. And she reached out and just had the most just like amazing compliments to what I've created here at the podcast. So I remember that meant a lot to me, and I was really excited to hear, because she is also has had a successful podcast in her life too, and she said, "You got it. This is great stuff." So it was a nice compliment. So I appreciate that, Liz. But anyways, that's how we got introduced, and from there we kind of formed a friendship. And, I was, just kind of like watching her go through her High Peaks journey and noticing it and taking note and watching and how it unfolded. And she wasn't going to hike in the winter. And then it's like, nope, I'm going to hike in the winter.